Welcome to Revenza Tales, where the shadows of truth unravel secrets that freeze the soul. Like, subscribe, and share to set this tale ablaze around the globe. Leave a comment with your city. How far has Stella's tale of suspicion traveled? In Phoenix, Arizona, a grandmother's peaceful life is shattered by one phone call, drawing her into a tapestry of suspicion and deceit. I'm Stella Brooks, a 65-year-old widow residing in a peaceful, sun-kissed Phoenix neighborhood. My days are governed by the soothing cadence of habit, a reassuring constant since my husband Raphael died 10 years ago. Every morning, I make coffee in a chipped blue mug, its well-used handle a reminder of hundreds of dawns spent with him. I care for my daisies in the garden, their white petals rustling in the desert wind, whispering sweet memories of better times. My life revolves around my two sons, Stephen, the diligent architect, and Ivan, my younger son, a co-pilot pursuing his boyhood dream of flying high in the skies. Stephen's family is my heart, his wife, Araceli, my daughter-in-law, and their son, my grandson Matthew, a bright 7-year-old with a smile that illuminates my world. This morning dawned as any other, the Arizona sun pouring golden light through my kitchen window. I was up to my elbows in dishwater, washing dishes from breakfast, the smell of bacon still hanging in the air. Stephen had left for work at dawn, his blueprints tucked under his arm, his goodbye kiss quick but warm. Matthew, my little rascal, had bounded onto the school bus, his backpack bouncing, his voice chirping about a new art project. Araceli, always impeccable in her white blouse, had floated upstairs moments ago, her soft voice calling down to me. "Mom, I'm taking a quick shower, okay?" I smiled, turning to the deserted kitchen, imagining her bright eyes and easy elegance. "Okay, honey," I said, voice warm, familiar. I'd hardly dried the final plate, my palms still wet under my apron, when the landline jolted, its sharp ring interrupting the morning stillness. I dried my hands, the cotton apron gentle against my fingers, and sprinted to the phone, anticipating a neighbor or a telemarketer. Instead, Ivan's cheerful voice filled the line, a burst of warmth like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Mom, just wanted to say hi," he said, his tone light, youthful. "I've got a layover at the airport, thought I'd check in." Hearing my younger son's voice was a hug across the miles, his words painting pictures of far-off runways and starry skies. Ivan, my pride and joy, had been dreaming of flight all his life, his childhood spent on model planes and stories of adventure. Now, at 28, he was a co-pilot, living the dream, his existence a blur of flights and layovers. I smiled, leaning against the counter, phone cord wrapped about my finger. "How's the sky treating you, sweetheart?" I asked, imagining his grin. He laughed, full and deep, the laughter soothing the pain of his distance. "Everything's terrific, Mom, work's fine, skies are fine." I inquired about his last flight, the places he had visited, the small things that kept us connected in spite of distance. But then his voice became guarded, a hesitation entering, like a cloud moving over the sun. "Hey Mom, something really strange just occurred," he said, his voice falling to a near whisper. My heart lurched, a prick of anxiety rising in my chest. "What's the matter, Ivan?" I said, my voice even but questioning, holding the receiver more tightly. He paused, his breath ringing through the phone, as if considering his words. "My sister-in-law's at your place, isn't she?" he said, his voice odd, reserved. I looked over at the stairs, where the distant gurgle of running water from the bathroom echoed up. "Of course she is, honey," I affirmed confidently, unflinching. "Araceli's upstairs, showering now." I visualized her in her white blouse, the one she wore like a second skin at home, her voice barely audible as she'd called out to me a few minutes ago. There was no space for uncertainty. She was present, in my house, as tangible as the dishes I had just washed. But Ivan didn't laugh, didn't tease me like he usually would. Instead, silence stretched across the line, long and heavy, his breathing slow and deliberate. When he spoke again, his voice was low, serious, laced with a shock that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, that's impossible," he said, each word deliberate, measured. "I'm holding her passport in my hand right now." My breath caught, a cold wave washing over me. "She lives just gotten on to my flight to France." I laughed, a reflexive nervousness, thinking that he'd misseen or misspoken. "Oh honey, you're mistaken," I said, trying to infuse calm into my tone, though my heart started racing. "I just went upstairs and saw Araceli. She said she was taking a shower." I tried to reassure him, to ground myself in the fact of her being there. But Ivan didn't laugh it off, didn't brush it with his usual humor. His voice slowed, as if assembling a jigsaw in his head. "Mom, listen to me," he said, his voice stern, insistent. "After the passengers had boarded, I went to fetch some documents I'd forgotten." He caught his breath. "That's when I saw a passport on the ground near the boarding gate." My fingers clenched around the receiver, my knuckles whitening. "I was about to give it to the airport people," he went on, "but I opened it up to make sure of the name." He hesitated, speaking in a whisper. "It was Araceli's, Mom, her picture, her name, plain as day." My head swirled, the kitchen whirling around me, the smell of soap and bacon cloying, suffocating. "There's no way I made a mistake," Ivan said, his voice firm. "Are you certain, Ivan?" I asked, my voice shaking, a small needle of doubt piercing my certainty. "That passport may not be yours." But even as I said it, a shiver was wrapped in my stomach, sharp and insistent. "Mom, I'm certain," he said, a blend of confusion and certainty in his voice. "I even checked the passenger cabin to be sure." He hesitated, as though the words were too surreal to utter. "She's sitting in first class at the moment, beside a man in a pricey suit." My heart hammered, a tom-tom against my rib cage. "They're talking intimate, Mom, a couple, all snugly and close." His words were a knife, cutting through the vision of Araceli I cherished. A couple. Out of the question. I just heard her voice, seen her shadow, known her presence within these walls. And then, at that instant, the water running upstairs ceased, sudden and jolting. The bedroom door slowly creaked ajar, and Araceli's voice drifted down, melodious but ominous. "Mom, is someone on the phone?" I startled, my heart flying up into my throat, thudding so violently I feared it would explode. "Just a friend, sweetie," I returned, my voice trembling, scantily covering the panic coalescing within. I rushed into the living room, shutting the door firmly, my fingers shaking as I held on to the phone. Footsteps came down the stairs, light but purposeful, and I saw Araceli's wet hair as she opened the door, her eyes questioning, her smile familiar but now somehow unnerving. I held the receiver tighter, speaking in a hushed, urgent voice to Ivan. "I just heard her, Ivan. She's here, just out of the shower." My voice broke, the desperation showing. "Are you positive you didn't misread?" Ivan was silent, his breathing harsh through the line. "Mom, there's no way," he said, voice cold, inflexible. "I'm standing in front of her now, on this flight, in seat 2A. He hesitated, his voice softening but not wavering. "No misread. Araceli is on my flight to France." My mind was blank, the world spinning beneath me. I put down the receiver, my own hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The living room, that sanctuary of family photos and comfortable memories, seemed claustrophobic, its walls pressing in. The sun poured through the curtains, casting brusque shadows on the tile floor, but it was cold. I sat down on the couch, my breathing shallow, my chest weighed down with questions with no answers. If Araceli was here, in my house, who was the woman on Ivan's plane? And if the woman on the plane was Araceli, who was the figure in my kitchen? Minutes later, Araceli came down the stairs, her feet barely making a sound, her wet hair shining in gentle waves. She was dressed in a pale blue dress, plain and lovely, her smile just as sweet, as if the world hadn't just shattered. "Mom, I'm going to the market early today," she said, her voice friendly, familiar, disarmingly sweet. "Do you want me to bring home something, perhaps some vegetables?" I gazed at her, trying to see a glimmer of something, anything, amiss. Her eyes shone, her smile bright, but my heart was racing, a tempest raging inside. "Yes, honey," I managed, my throat parched, my voice hardly stable. "Some tomatoes would be great." She nodded, taking her wicker basket in her right hand, her movements fluid, natural. "Back soon," she said, her form disappearing through the front gate, the sun catching in her hair. I stood transfixed, watching her, my soul a maelstrom of doubt and fear. Ivan wasn't deceiving me. My son had nothing to make up. He'd always been truthful, feeling, the boy who'd cry at a wounded bird, who'd phone just to hear the sound of my voice. But Araceli, the daughter-in-law I'd taken into my household, was simply here, her existence as tangible as the coffee cup in my hand. I dropped into my armchair, the one where I'd read to Matthew, its soft velvet now suffocating. Had I missed something all these years? Was there a secret buried in this house, hidden beneath the happy family I'd clung to? Memories of Araceli flooded my mind, each one now tinged with doubt. She'd always been the perfect daughter-in-law, beautiful, industrious, a devoted mother to Matthew. I remember their wedding, a joyful day in her parents' modest backyard, the air filled with laughter and music. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they'd poured their hearts into every detail, from the handmade decorations to the towering cake. Araceli had walked in with a confident smile, her eyes bright, as if born to be Stephen's wife, my daughter-in-law. I'd thought myself lucky, blessed to have her in our family. But now, Ivan's call cast a shadow over every memory, turning moments of warmth into questions. There were days when Araceli seemed different. Some mornings, she'd hug Matthew tightly, singing lullabies in her soft, melodic voice until he fell asleep. Other days, she'd snap at me over trivial things, a misplaced salt shaker, a dish left in the sink, her eyes cold, her tone sharp. I'd chalked it up to stress, to the mood swings of a young mother juggling family and life. But now those moments seemed clues, fragments of a puzzle I hadn't even realized existed. I remembered a day ago when she wrote a grocery list, her right hand steady and sure with the pen's movements. The next morning, she wrote using her left hand, the letters curving in unfamiliar loops, as if unpracticed. "Since when do you write with your left hand, honey?" I'd asked, wonder rather than fear lighting my mind. She'd laughed, a quick, bright sound, brushing it off. "Just playing around, Mom, trying something new." I'd nodded, smiling, thinking nothing of it. Now, that memory was a splinter in my mind, sharp and unyielding. The front door burst open, pulling me from my thoughts. Matthew ran in, his backpack bouncing, his face alight with excitement. "Grandma," he chirped, throwing his arms around me, his warmth a fleeting comfort. "Today, my drawing was the best that the teacher has ever seen." I smoothed his hair, putting on a smile, though my chest hurt with unvoiced terrors. "That's great, sweetie," I replied, my voice gentler than I had meant it to be. He jumped onto the couch, producing his notebook, its pages creased from excited fingers. "See, Grandma," he announced, holding up 2 pages together. "Yesterday Mommy did my homework, and her handwriting was so beautiful." He touched a sheet of neatly lettered, even letters, in blue ink. "But today, she wrote in her other hand, and it's all sloppy." He indicated a sheet of tilted, uneven scribbles, the ink smudged as if in a hurry. My heart dropped, a cold knot forming in my belly. "She was probably exhausted today, sweetie," I replied, my voice shaking, barely disguising my anxiety. "That's why it appears different." But Matthew's eyes, wide and innocent, held a flicker of confusion. "Grandma, Mommy's so weird sometimes," he said, his voice small, uncertain. "Some days she hugs me super tight, like she loves me so much." He paused, his gaze dropping. "But other days, she doesn't even look at me, like I'm not there." His words were a knife, twisting deeper into my doubts. I held him tight, his tiny body warm against my chest, but my thoughts were elsewhere, knotted into question. He was 7 years old. How could he know something I couldn't even wrap my head around? The doorbell cut sharply through the air, shattering me from my reverie. I flung the door open to see my neighbor Mrs. Collins standing with a plate Araceli had taken yesterday. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes flashed a spark of curiosity, an unspoken question. "Stella, your daughter-in-law is so sweet," she said, offering me the plate. "But yesterday, when she brought this back, she handed it to me with her left hand." She cocked her head, dropping her voice. "Didn't you say she's right-handed?" My heart began to pound, but I smiled, tightening my fingers around the plate. "Perhaps she's practicing both hands, Helen," I said, my voice almost whistling with pretense. "Do you want to come in for tea?" She nodded, entering, the smell of her lavender perfume blended with the coffee scent in the air. We sat in the kitchen, the warm lamplight doing little to dispel the cold in my bones. Mrs. Collins had a sip of her tea, her eyes serious. "Stella, don't take this the wrong way," she said, her voice gentle but questioning. "But Araceli's been different lately." She leaned forward, her hands wrapped around her cup. "One day she stops to talk, inquires about my children, all smiles and light." She stopped, her brow wrinkling. "But yesterday, she passed by me on the street, didn't even lift a finger." She shook her head, bewildered. It was as though she didn't even know me. Her words were another rock in the dark lake of my heart, ripples going wider, deeper. She was probably distracted, I replied, my voice tight, a forced smile on my face. You know young people are busy. But inside, I was fraying, Mrs. Collins' remark replaying Ivan's summons, Matthew's bewilderment. If my own neighbor saw these changes, was I losing my mind, or was something really amiss? I strolled over to the garden, the watering can heavy in my hand. The daisies danced, their petals reflecting the dying light, but there was no peace. Ivan's words cycled round my head, unrelenting, unbeatable. She's sitting in first class, beside a man, like a couple. Matthew's voice added its voice to the chorus, innocent confusion now a warning. Mrs. Collins' comment, careless yet pointed, another strand in a tapestry of doubt. Araceli came back from the market, her wicker basket swinging, but I saw it, she grasped it in her left hand. My breath caught, a memory flashing. Araceli always used her right hand, chopping vegetables, brushing Matthew's hair. Good afternoon, Mom, she said, dryly, without the warmth of yesterday's gossiping about market bargains. You're home earlier than expected, I answered, my tone low, my gaze fixed on her. She had a navy blue shirt on instead now, not the white one she'd worn out. Why'd you switch your blouse? I quizzed, my voice gentle but inquiring, my heart racing. She halted for a fraction of a second, her smile wavering, and then regained herself. Oh, I spilled something on it at the store, she replied, her tone silky, too silky. Had to switch when I visited a friend's. She burst into the kitchen, her footsteps swift, elusive. I remained immobile, my cold teacup in hand, my tight chest full of suspicion. We sat down to dinner that night, the familiar old china of my mother on the table, a ceremony of routine now colored with tension. Matthew talked on and on about school, his tones effervescent, but Araceli merely nodded, her eyes 1,000 miles away, her fork inching its way. Stephen, exhausted from work, smiled at his son, inquiring about his day, but I observed Araceli, hunting for the woman I believed I had known. She grasped a notebook, writing something with her left hand, the strokes uneven, strange. Stephen laughed, a carefree sound that jolted against tension in my chest. Hey, since when do you write with your left hand? He asked, in a playful tone. It looks so strange. Araceli went rigid, her pen poised, a flicker of panic on her face before she pasted on a smile. Just testing, honey, she stated, voice strained, shoving the notebook into her bag. Stephen shrugged, returning his attention to his plate, but I caught it, the momentary break in her facade, the fear in her eyes. Later, as I was clearing the table, Matthew knocked over his water, the glass falling, liquid wetting the tablecloth. I smiled quietly, picking up a rag. It's all right, honey, just watch where you're going next time, I told him, musing his hair. But Araceli's face turned angry, her voice like a whiplash. Matthew, why are you always so clumsy? She snapped, her eyes snapping. You have to be more careful. The table grew quiet, Stephen's fork suspended in mid-air, his brow wrinkled. Araceli, it was an accident, he said softly, firmly. No need to yell. She turned to him, her eyes blazing, a spark of anger I'd rarely seen. You always take his side, she said, her voice sharp, cutting. I end up looking like the bad guy in this house. Matthew shrank in his chair, his eyes glistening with tears, his small hands clutching his napkin. I hugged him close, my heart breaking, but my mind racing. Days before, Araceli had been calm, gentle, doing Matthew's homework, her voice so soothing as a lullaby. Now she was icy, snappish, a stranger in my house. I regarded her from across the table, her left hand cradling her glass, her right stashed away. The puzzle pieces were mounting, her changing moods, her writing, her blouse, Ivan's impossibly timed call. Each was a strand in a web I couldn't yet perceive, but the pressure of it weighed against my chest. I smiled, I forced it, cleared the plates, but deep inside me suspicion smoldered like a slow flame. Was I getting too old to see the cracks in my own house? Or had I been blind, holding on to the illusion of a perfect family while a secret fell apart beneath my roof? As the sun went down, sending long shadows across the garden, I sat on the porch, my tea gone cold, my heart weighted down. Araceli's shadow shifted in the kitchen, familiar but strange, and I wondered, who was the woman who was staying in my home? The air in the small house at 14 was heavy with disinfectant, overlaid with the damp, musty smell of old walls. I sat in a creaky wooden chair, its wobbly legs straining under my weight, my hands shaking as I held the family photo. Isadora, the lady with Araceli's face, stood before me, her eyes filled to brimming with tears, her rag firmly twisted in her trembling hands. Her similarity to my daughter-in-law was eerie. Same long black hair, same delicate features, same soft curve of jaw. But her face, red with fear and guilt, was a stranger's and not the broad smile I'd grown accustomed to for so long. Lucy Miller, her roommate, sat across from me, her gaunt body tall with soft strength, her hair wound tightly into a bun. Her sharp but kind eyes contained a truth I wasn't certain I was prepared to hear. The old man in the cot at the back of the room coughed, a faint rattle, his thin body hardly moving under a tattered blanket. My heart was thumping, each blow like a hammer in my chest, as I struggled to believe the impossible. Isadora wasn't Araceli. My daughter-in-law, the woman who had been loved like a daughter by me, had been lying to us all along. I gazed at Isadora, my voice hardly firm, every word weighed down with incredulity. "You're not Araceli," I stated, throat constricted, the photograph shuddering in my hands. "Then why are you in my house, impersonating her?" Isadora's head dropped lower, her tears dropping onto the broken concrete floor, each a wordless admission. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Brooks," she whispered, voice thick with shame. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." She hesitated, her hands clenched around the rag until her knuckles turned white. "My adoptive parents, they're ill, dying." She nodded toward the old man, his hacking cough sounding like a metronome. "I needed money for their treatment, for their care." Her words faltered, her shoulders shaking as she struggled to go on. "Araceli, she provided an escape." Lucy leaned in, her voice steady but unyielding, slicing through the thick silence. "Isadora ran into Araceli accidentally at a marketplace 2 years ago," she told me, her eyes fixed on mine. They might have been twins, the same face, the same build, the same voice. She hesitated, pouring water from a battered plastic container, the water shimmering in the poor light. "Araceli saw the opening and seized it." My breath froze, a chill wave spilling over me, the room contracting with every word. "She paid Isadora to pose as herself," Lucy went on, her voice level but tinged with disapproval. "For a few hours at a time, whenever Araceli had to be somewhere else." I clutched the armrest of the chair, my nails scrabbling into the worn wood, my head spinning. "Somewhere else," I snapped, my voice cutting, shaking with increasing anger. "What does it mean? Where was she going?" Isadora's eyes shifted away, her voice on the verge of inaudibility. "She never told me everything," she said, her words halting, fragile. "She'd call, tell me to go to your house, act like her." She swallowed hard, her tears falling faster. "I'd go to the market, cook dinner, take care of Matthew." Her voice cracked at his name, guilt etching deeper lines into her face. "She gave me scripts, what to say, how to act, what to wear." She gestured to her dress, a pale yellow floral print, identical to the one I'd seen Araceli leave in. "She paid me enough to keep my parents alive," she said, her voice breaking. I couldn't say no. My heart twisted, a mix of pity and fury battling within me. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand answers, but her pain was raw, real. Lucy's voice pierced my thoughts, her tone tighter now, desperate. "I didn't want her to continue it," she said, her eyes lighting up with anger. "I told Isadora that it was bad, that it would hurt others." She paused, her gaze becoming softer as she regarded her friend. "But Araceli was convincing, and Isadora's family was desperate." I leaned forward, my voice low, shaking with barely suppressed anger. "Why would Araceli require you to pose as her?" I demanded, my gaze drilling into Isadora's. "What was she afraid of from us?" Lucy faltered, her hands around the glass clenched so hard her knuckles were white. "I don't know everything," she said, her words slow, deliberate. "But I saw her once, roughly a year ago, in a coffee shop downtown." She hesitated, her eyes locking with mine, a flicker of unease in them. "She was with a man, tall, elegant, in an expensive suit." My breath caught, Ivan's words running through my head. "She's sitting in first class, beside a wealthy man, like a couple." "They were close, whispering, laughing," Lucy went on, her voice sliding down to a near whisper. "She said honey to him, and he said the same to her." She stopped, her eyes scanning mine for a reaction. His name was Charles Thompson. I heard it when they were speaking. The name fell inside me like a rock, cold and heavy, my hands trembling so hard I knocked the glass over. Water poured onto the table, collecting on the broken floor, but I hardly saw it. Lucy reached for a rag, her motion swift, but I pushed her away, my words constricting. Araceli's been lying to us, I whispered, each word a splinter of glass. She's cheating on my son, my grandson, our family. Isadora sobbed, her face buried in her hands, her voice muffled with regret. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Brooks, she said, her words broken by tears. I didn't know how far it went, I just wanted to save my parents. I looked at her, my heart torn between anger and pity, her pain a mirror of my own. She was a pawn, used by the woman I'd trusted, but her choices had hurt my family. You impersonated her, I told him, my voice icy, biting. You sang Matthew's lullaby Cielito Lindo, the one Araceli and I alone knew. Isadora's eyes went wide, the color draining from her face as she understood the extent of her deceit. She taught me the song, she breathed, her voice shaking. She said it would make Matthew feel safe, make it convincing. My chest constricted, the recollection of Matthew's words slicing through me. Yesterday she sang so beautifully, Grandma. You toyed with my grandson's heart, I said, my voice trembling with pain and fury. You let him think you were his mother. Lucy grasped Isadora's hand, her hand soft but insistent, her eyes locked on mine. She didn't want to, Mrs. Brooks, she said, her voice calm, imploring. Araceli manipulated her, made it a game. She hesitated, her face stiffening. But I've seen Araceli with that man more than once. She moved in closer, her voice reduced to a whisper, as though the walls had ears. Last month, I saw them at a hotel, checking in together, their hands together. My eyes went blurry, tears scalding behind my eyes, the betrayal seeping deeper with every new revelation. Ivan's call, Matthew's bewilderment, the neighbor's remarks, all the fragments fell into place, a puzzle I'd refused to acknowledge. I stood there, my legs shaking, the photograph falling from my hand onto the table. The photo of Araceli smiling with Stephen and Matthew taunted me, her beaming smile now a false smile. I must know all, I asserted, my voice strong, though my heart was shattering. Where does Araceli go when you replace her? Isadora shook her head, her tears falling more rapidly, her voice almost a whisper. Not ever, she replied, looking at me with desperate eyes. She'd call, tell me a time and a place, what to do. She hesitated, her fingers shaking. A number of times she'd say it was to see a friend, or to surprise Stephen. Her voice cracked, shame gagging her words. But I knew she was lying, I could tell by her eyes. Lucy's eyes became hard, dark, her voice low and urgent. I tailed her once, she confessed, hands tightly clasped, eyes cast away from mine. She went to some high-class restaurant at the outskirts of town, met Charles Thompson there. She hesitated, her voice a virtual whisper. They never spotted me, but I saw the way they regarded one another, like they loved each other. My heart plummeted, a cold heaviness settling in my chest, the truth too dire to bear. Araceli, the woman I had invited into my house, was leading a dual life, betraying my son, my grandson, me. I swung round to Isadora, my voice even but tinged with steel. How many times did you substitute her? I demanded, my eyes drilling into hers. Isadora gulped, her hands wringing the rag, her voice almost inaudible. Once or twice a month, she whispered, her eyes falling to the ground. Sometimes more, when she had longer trips. The room swirled, the walls caving in, the air heavy with deceit. I remembered Matthew, his childlike voice. Grandma, I want the mom from yesterday. I remembered Stephen, putting in an extra shift, not knowing his wife was leaving with another man. I remembered Ivan, standing over Araceli's passport, seeing her get on a plane to France with a stranger. Every moment of doubt, her shifting moods, her changing handwriting, her sudden absences, now made sense. But the truth was a blade, cutting through the family I'd fought to protect. I returned home as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the Phoenix streets. The house was quiet, Matthew at a friend's, Stephen still at work, Araceli, or whoever she was, nowhere in sight. I sank into my armchair, the familiar creak of its springs no comfort now. My notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with shaky notes. 3 p.m., Araceli leaves in yellow dress. 6 p.m., returns in white blouse, irritable. I added a new line, my hand trembling. Met Isadora, Araceli's double. She's been impersonating her for years. Every word was a burden, substantiating my suspicions into truth, a reality that I could no longer deny. The door creaked, and Araceli entered, her wicker basket swinging, her smile wide but empty. "Mom, I got those tomatoes you wanted," she replied, her voice soft, friendly, but now deceitful. I looked at her, trying to find the woman I'd trusted, but I saw only a mask, her eyes closed off, her motion too controlled. "Thanks, honey," I stated, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding with questions. She entered the kitchen, humming softly, but the melody wasn't Cielito Lindo, the lullaby she'd used to deceive us. I gripped my notebook, my fingers tracing the words I'd written, each one a step toward the truth. That night, Matthew bounded into my room, his cheeks flushed from playing, his eyes bright with innocence. "Grandma, Mommy didn't sing to me tonight," he said, his voice small, his hands clutching a pencil he'd dropped earlier. "But yesterday she sang Cielito Lindo, just like you, and it was so pretty." His words were a piercing needle in my heart, sharp and cutting, affirming what I dreaded. I clung to him tightly, his heat a temporary solace against the tempest raging inside me. "She was exhausted, baby," I murmured, my voice shaking, tears smoldering behind my eyes. "But Grandma's always here." He burrowed into my shoulder, whispering, "I want yesterday's mommy." I touched his hair, my heart shattering, realizing yesterday's mommy had been Isadora, a hired stranger to pretend. Later, by myself in my room, I opened my notebook, the pages dense with reality. I wrote, "Araceli's lied. Charles Thompson. Secret life." The words glared back, a demon I couldn't erase, each one a fissure in the family I'd loved. I remembered Stephen, his open smile, unaware of the deceit beneath his roof. I remembered Matthew, bewildered by a mother who shifted by the day. I remembered Ivan, his voice in my ear, sure of what he'd witnessed. The house was still, but the truth yelled, unremitting, unwavering. Next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee gone cold, my gaze on the garden. The daisies danced in the wind, their petals laughing at my unrest with their serene loveliness. Araceli walked in, moving fast, her smile too vibrant, like an actress on a stage. "Morning, Mom," she said, filling herself with coffee, her right hand firm, rehearsed. I observed her intently, aware of every movement, every look, seeking the deceit behind her disguise. "Morning," I said, my tone level, but thoughts whirling with schemes. I couldn't confront her yet, not without proof, not without protecting Stephen and Matthew. But the notebook in my drawer was my weapon, its pages a map to the truth. I'd followed her once, seen her double, heard her secrets. Now, I'd follow her again, dig deeper, uncover the full scope of her deception. The sun rose higher, casting harsh light through the window, but it couldn't pierce the shadow over my heart. Araceli wasn't only keeping a secret, she was breaking apart my family, and I was going to stop her. The air inside my Phoenix house seemed thick, as if the very walls breathed in unison. I stood in the kitchen, my fingers digging into the counter, the smell of chili and grilled fish hanging in the air from the meal I had made. The white tablecloth on the dinner table shone in the candlelight, a pretense of serenity covering the turmoil I was about to unleash. This evening would not be a routine family meal, it would be a judgment, an expose of the truth. My pulse throbbed, each pulsation a testament to the treachery I had discovered in that dingy alley outside number 14. Araceli, my daughter-in-law, had deceived us all, using her twin sister Isadora as a pawn in a game of lies. I chopped vegetables with deliberate care, the knife's rhythm steadying my trembling hands. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying Isadora's tearful confession, Lucy's revelations about Charles Thompson, and Ivan's voice, "She's on my flight to France." The truth was a jagged blade, cutting through the family I'd fought to protect. Stephen came in with the light of evening closing in, his architect's briefcase full in his hand, his face marked by exhaustion. He stopped to see the table, candles lighted, the scent of his beloved chili in the air. "Mom, what's this?" he asked, his furrowed brow softening into a small smile at the corners of his mouth. "Are we celebrating something?" I tried to smile, my voice steady though turmoil churned inside me. "Just wanted us to have a special night, honey," I told her, waving toward the table. Sit down, relax. Araceli appeared, her light blue dress flowing, her smile gentle but laced with nervousness, her eyes flicking to mine. I saw her hand shiver ever so slightly as she placed her wicker basket down, the same one that had changed color from red to blue on my notebook pages. Matthew burst in, his 7-year-old energy illuminating the room, his arms hugging my legs. "The fish smells so great, Grandma," he squeaked, his wide, innocent smile a temporary solace. I brushed his hair, a hard ball forming in my throat, realizing this night could ruin his innocent world. We were seated at the table, the clattering of silverware and Matthew's talking breaking the silence initially. Stephen shared stories of his latest project, his voice warm, unaware of the truth lurking in the shadows. Araceli nodded, her responses brief, her spoon moving slowly, her eyes avoiding mine. I watched her closely, noting the way her right hand gripped her glass, steady now, unlike the left-handed scrawls I'd seen. My notebook, hidden in my lap, burned with its recorded truths. Araceli's double. Charles Thompson. Lies. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, and signaled to Ivan, who waited outside, his pilot's cap tucked under his arm. The door creaked open, and he stepped in, his face grim, determination in his eyes. Behind him stood Isadora, her simple dress a stark contrast to Araceli's elegance, her face a mirror of her twins but etched with anguish. The room went still, the tension thick in the air, the candles dancing as if aware of the tempest. Matthew's eyes grew wide, passing between Araceli and Isadora, his soft voice shattering the silence. "Why are there two mommies?" he queried, his innocence driving a dagger into my heart. Stephen's spoon dropped to the table, his face going white, his eyes fixed on Isadora's mirrored face. Araceli sprang to her feet, her chair scraping across the floor, her voice tight with fear. "What is this, Mom?" she spat at me, fury flashing in her eyes. "What sort of trickery are you up to?" I rose, holding on to the edge of the table, my voice deliberate but firm, each word a stone in the foundation of the truth. "Sit down, Araceli," I said, my eyes steady, though shaking hands. "We're sorting everything out tonight." I started, my own voice firm through the agony ripping through me, every word a wound reopened. "Ivan phoned me weeks ago at the airport," I told her, my gaze locked on Araceli. "He watched you get on a flight to France, next to some man, close, like a couple." I waited for it to sink in, watched her face lose color, her lips compress. "But you were here, in this house, showering, cooking, pretending nothing was wrong." I pointed to Isadora, who remained silent, her gaze cast downward. "Then I met Isadora, your twin sister, the one you hired to take your place." Gasps erupted in the room, Stephen's breath caught, Matthew's eyes wide with confusion. "You used her to mislead us," I went on, my voice growing louder, shaking with betrayal. "You taught her our lullaby, Cielito Lindo, to fool Matthew, to keep up your lie." Araceli's face was ashen, her hands clenched, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "She's lying," she shouted, pointing at Isadora, her voice shrill with desperation. "This is a setup to humiliate me." Ivan stepped forward, his pilot's uniform crisp, his voice hard as he slammed a stack of papers onto the table. "This is your electronic passport," he stated, his voice firm, his gaze fixed on Araceli. "It has entry and exit stamps from France, dates when you supposedly were here." He stopped, his voice soft, hurting. "You can't be two places at one time, Araceli." She gazed at the documents, her lips shaking, her defiance dissolving under the evidence. Matthew's small, hurt voice broke through the tension, his eyes brimming with tears. "Yeah, Grandma," he replied, his voice shaking, his fists around his napkin. "Some mornings Mommy's so sweet, sings to me, hugs me tight." He took a deep breath, his lips shaking. "But other times she's cruel, won't even look at me." His words were a knife, cutting across the room, my heart shattering for my grandson. I drew him to me, holding him tight, tears stinging behind my eyes. Stephen wheeled on Araceli, his voice thick, his fists bunched so hard his knuckles paled. "Is this true, Araceli?" he demanded, his eyes scouring hers, begging for her to deny it. "Tell me it isn't true." Araceli stood motionless, her breathing harsh, her eyes snapping from Stephen to Isadora to me. Then, as a dam was breached, her voice came out, rough and anguished, no hint of regret. "Yes, it's true," she yelled, her statement a bomb exploding the room. "I'm finished with this life, This house, this poverty. She glared at Stephen, cold, venomous eyes burning into him. Charles Thompson provides me with everything you never could, a life of luxury, freedom, love. She snapped her mouth shut, her voice laced with contempt. You're nothing, Stephen, a failure who can't keep up with me. Stephen stood there, his face a shock mask, his hands shaking as her words cut more than any knife. Matthew wept, burying his face in my arms, his little body convulsing. Grandma, what Mommy is saying, he murmured, his voice shattering my heart. I wrapped my arms around him, tears flowing down my cheeks, my voice barely stable. It's all right, honey, I said, smoothing his hair, though nothing was all right. Isadora, quiet until then, walked forward, her voice barely audible but unmistakable, her eyes brimming with anguish. Sister, you needn't have harmed them so, she charged, her eyes fixed on Araceli. I only wanted to help you, to save my parents, but I didn't think you'd go so far. Araceli spun around, her eyes burning with rage, but words failed her, her silence a tacit confession of wrongdoing. She took her bag, her body moving in jerky motions, and stormed out, the door banging shut, the noise booming like a shot. The room plunged into stranglehold silence, the candles dancing, throwing shadows on the table. Stephen collapsed into his chair, his face vacant, his eyes gazing at emptiness, as if his spirit had been drained out. Matthew held on to me, his sobs wetting my blouse, his muffled voice whining. Grandma, why did Mommy go away? He asked, his naivety destroying me as well. I hugged him tightly, my heart heavy, searching for words to comfort him. Ivan put a hand on Stephen's shoulder, his visage stern, pilot's cap now on the table, a gesture of his grounded commitment. Isadora stood apart, her hands folded, tears streaming down her cheeks, her guilt a weighty shadow. The following days were a blur of sorrow, the house devoid of its laughter, its warmth. Araceli disappeared, leaving behind only an empty space where our family had been. Stephen and Araceli divorced a week later in the courthouse, a cold, robotic end to a love founded on deception. Stephen came home, his voice empty as he told the day, his eyes absent. She didn't even glance at me or Matthew, he testified, his fists around a coffee cup. She signed the documents and walked off with that guy, Charles, like we didn't exist. I felt pain, not only for Stephen, but for Matthew, who'd been left by a mother who'd used him as a pawn in her game of deceit. Araceli hadn't sought custody, hadn't struggled for her son, her departure a last act of betrayal. I'll always be here, honey, I told him, grasping Stephen's hand, my voice shaking. Matthew will never lack love. But deep within me lay the pain of a wound that may never mend. Stephen pulled back into himself, hiding behind work, his blueprints a sanctuary from his sorrow. He'd sit in the garden, his eyes following Matthew as he played, the same haunted expression on his face that my husband Raphael had had in his last days. I wanted to embrace him, to assure him everything would be all right, but the words sounded empty, insufficient. But amidst the darkness, a tiny light flickered forth, Isadora. She came every day, her presence soft but unyielding, like a candle during a hurricane. She brought bowls of steaming soup, her fingers soft as she fidgeted with Matthew, her voice gentle as she replied to his queries. Why did my other mommy go away, Auntie? He'd ask, his gaze searching hers. Isadora would sit on her heels, her face so similar to Araceli's and yet so not, her heart open and genuine. She had to leave, sweetheart, she'd respond, her voice shaking but gentle. But I'm here, and I love you. One afternoon, Matthew would dash to her, his sketchbook flying, his voice shining with delight. Draw me a bird, Mommy Isadora, he said, grinning, freed from the troubles of the past. I stiffened, my heart clenching, tears brimming as I heard him address her as Mommy. Isadora chuckled, her eyes sparkling, and mussed his hair. All right, my darling, but you'd better make it the most beautiful bird I've ever seen, she said, her tone warm, sincere. I stood in the doorway, my cheeks wet with tears, Matthew's words a soothing balm to my hurting heart. Isadora wasn't replacing Araceli, she was becoming family, healing her sister's hurt with her love. In the evening, when I washed the dishes in the kitchen, the metallic clinking a soothing familiarity, Stephen summoned me to the living room. He stood there, grasping a tiny silver ring, his hands shaking, his eyes a combination of nervousness and determination. Isadora stood with him, her complexion flushed, her plain blouse a contrast to Araceli's beauty. Stephen knelt down, his voice cracking as he gazed up at her. Isadora, you brought light into my life and Matthew's, he said, his words raw, emotional. You've shown us love when we believed it was lost. He stood there, the ring shining in the lamplight. Will you be my wife, Matthew's mom? Isadora's eyes welled up with tears, her eyes flashing to me, looking for permission. I moved forward, grasping her hand, my voice gentle but firm. You've been a member of this family for a long time, honey, I said, nodding slightly. You deserve this. She squeezed me, tears on my shoulder, her voice a whisper. Thanks, Mrs. Brooks, she managed, her voice thick with thanks. They wed in a simple ceremony, our backyard the stage, red roses strung along the fence, their petals dancing in the wind. Matthew, in a miniature suit, grinned as best man to his dad, his laughter ringing through the garden. Ivan flew in from a business trip, his pilot's uniform sharp, his smile as bright as the day he flew for the first time. I sat in the front row, my daisies in bloom behind me, tears of happiness replacing tears of loss. Isadora, wearing a simple white wedding dress, held Stephen's hand, her eyes bright with love, not with deception. As they promised their vows to each other, I watched my family heal, the cracks Araceli had left slowly mending. Life fell into a new pace, the house filled again with Matthew's laughter, Isadora's soft songs. She prepared hot meals, her hands firm as she cut up vegetables, her voice gentle as she sang Cielito Lindo to Matthew at night. She'd sit with Stephen, hearing his fantasies, her eyes shining brightly with pride as he drew blueprints. Matthew no longer inquired about his other mommy, his smile unfettered as he snuggled into Isadora's arms, addressing her as Mom. One evening, I sat on the porch, the desert wind cool on my skin, daisies scent blending with the stars. Inside, Matthew's giggles blended with Isadora's lullaby, Stephen's soft laughter a gentle undertone. I glimpsed through the window, Isadora placing a cup of tea next to Stephen, her fingers grazing his, her kiss gentle on his forehead. My heart, once weighed down by skepticism, was light, content. The journey was long, from the call of Ivan to the dark alley, from falsehood to truth. Lies of Araceli had almost destroyed us, but the truth, as my husband Raphael used to say, had liberated us. It brought us Isadora, a woman who healed with her heart what her sister destroyed. I opened my notebook for the last time, its pages creased, its words a testament to my strength. I wrote, Truth healed us. Isadora is family. Love prevails. I closed it, my hands firm, my soul intact. This is Revenza Tales, where darkness yields to the light of truth. The names and locations have been altered to ensure the anonymity of the parties involved. We publish this story not to condemn, but to raise questions about the hidden conflicts that plague families. What would you have done in Stella's situation? Would you remain quiet to maintain the peace, or confront the truth to regain your voice? Leave a comment with your opinion and your city. How far has this story come? Like, subscribe, and share to keep these stories going. On your screen, discover 2 of our favorite stories, waiting to surprise you. Thank you for being with me. May courage guide your path to better days. God bless.